There's not much to do when all I can is thinking about you. Not doing well, don't know where you are, 'cause you're not here. It's been way too long. If I could lay down beside.
Welcome to the necropolis in Scotland. So when you're walking around this burial ground, it doesn't look like there's 50,000 burials here, as only 3,500 of them actually have tombs. So the necropolis was established by the Merchants' House of Glasgow in 1831. And the first person in the early 1800s to be buried here was a jeweller called Joseph Levy. He was in fact Jewish. Coming up is the memorial of William Miller. He was a Scottish poet, and he's best known for the nursery rhyme as for Wee Willie Winkle or Wee Willie Winkie. Wee Willie Winkie rang through the town, upstairs, downstairs in his nightgown. He suffered from ill health and he wanted to become a surgeon, but because of his ill health he couldn't. So he began writing poetry and children's rhyme in his Scottish language, and his poetry was published in various books. He had an ulcerated leg, and he done cabinet making to make more money, and he had to retire from that due to his leg, and his leg became infected, and he died in 1872, aged 62. He wasn't buried here, he was buried at Toll Cross as he was destitute, but a memorial was put up here in the Glasgow Necropolis to best suit his life. So the necropolis in Glasgow has been known throughout many years as Glasgow's Victorian City of the Dead. It's described as one of the most significant cemeteries in Europe, and it has become a major tourist attraction. It's easy to see why. I mean, when I went there, it wasn't what I was expecting. I was expecting an old, scary cemetery. But it wasn't. It was calm, it was peaceful, it was old, and it was just a really nice walk round. The stonemasonry work was amazing round here. There was these like little angels dotted about, and the stones that the Victorians used, they are just amazing. I don't think you can get a good enough or gauge a good enough perspective on how big these stones actually were. And because they were on a hill, some of them were just towering over you, like just massive statues of, you think, oh, these are great people. And they were ordinary folk. They just really looked after their dead's grave, really. Excuse me if you can hear my dog. She's chewing on a little bonio. So why is this cemetery in Glasgow called Glasgow Necropolis and not Glasgow Cemetery? Well, the reason for that is because a necropolis is a large cemetery of elaborate construction in an ancient city, whilst a cemetery is a place where the dead are buried, not bed are buried, dead are buried, and they're buried in a cemetery which isn't attached to a church. If it's attached to a church, it's a graveyard. If it's just a plot of land or a garden or a memorial garden, it's a cemetery. If it's in an ancient city and it's very elaborate, it's a necropolis. I hope that made sense, because I am exhausted. This building is the cemetery's vault. This is where burials are temporarily placed while their tombs or memorials or mausoleums are built. It's no longer in use and you can't get in, but I'd love to have gone in there. If you're anything like me, you half expect someone to come walk round the corner. Here we have the memorial of Dr. James Jeffrey. Dr. Jeffrey was a professor of anatomy and botany at Glasgow University from 1790 till 1848. He studied anatomy using the bodies of those executed for murder, and only those executed for murder. Dr. Jeffrey dissected the body of the executed murderer Matthew Clydesdale. Clydesdale was hanged for the murder of Andrew Love with a pickaxe. Clydesdale's body was subjected to passing of an electric current in the anatomy room. It was an experiment to study the impact on the human nervous system. Dr. Jeffrey connected Clydesdale's body to a battery, and when it was connected, the voltage made his hands and fingers moved. This whole event took place at the Anatomy Theatre at the Old College. So the author of Frankenstein, as we all know as Mary Shelley, says that she attended many anatomy lessons in various places, and the story goes that she attended this one by Dr. James Jeffrey and the electrocution of body parts, and this is where she got the inspiration for her book Frankenstein. So another interesting thing about this necropolis is that every single one of the 500,000 people that were interred here were recorded. So their name, date, gender, cause of death, date of death and profession is available in the archives for everyone to see even now. John King. Who's a merchant. The necropolis is also a multi-faith necropolis. So we have Catholics, Protestants, Quakers, Jews, Lutherans and everybody else. The Jewish people are buried in a separate plot, but that's because of their beliefs. So those small rings you can see there on the floor, they were to gain access to the tomb below. They were to help pull the slabs up so you could reinter people. They were cemented in once you'd finished, or there was no family left. So yeah, that's what they were. Do you reckon they've been stolen?
I don't know, I'd say defaced, maybe shame was
Brought upon the family.
all three of them to come down.
Malcolm's.
Or maybe there was some upkeep that they had to pay, or they never got around to paying for the tombstones.
Originally, this was designed to have catacombs running deep into the hill overlooking the Glasgow Cathedral. It was decided this was necessary because of the morbid but highly profitable resurrectionists. I've explained about them in previous videos, but these are grave robbers that would exhume the bodies of freshly dead people and sell them to anatomists so they could do their research, and without them, I guess we wouldn't be as far advanced as we were so soon back in the day. But still, you don't want your dead relative to end up in a laboratory without you knowing, being dug up from the grave. So it would have been easier to put them in catacombs under the ground, but that was deemed to be not necessary because the Anatomy Act of 1832 came in. So, of course, corpse robbing would no longer be a profitable industry, so there was no need for expensive catacombs. So you know I love to put a little bit of conspiracy theories into all my videos, really. So if you're a fan of the Da Vinci Code, the necropolis has been called a 37-acre landscaped metaphor of Freemasonry, hidden in plain sight, as the old saying goes. The majority of people involved in the creation of this necropolis were well-known Freemasons. The most well-known members are buried here, and there are multiple Freemason symbols scattered across the site. In September in 1954 was the birth of a folklore. It is rumoured that school children saw a 7-foot-tall vampire with iron teeth. Now, the rumours then spread to that the vampire had kidnapped and murdered 2 young boys and feasted on their corpses. Despite the police trying to calm everybody down and saying this isn't true, the children decided that action had to be taken, and they nicknamed the vampire Gorbals Vampire and said that he had to be brought to justice. So after school, hundreds of children of all ages armed themselves with blades, crosses, stakes and dogs and descended upon this necropolis in Glasgow. They went out to hunt the Gorbals Vampire. They prowled the graveyards and they checked behind the trees and headstones. And if they saw a shadowy figure, they would shout, and the children would then run to the silhouette, try and find a vampire in the graveyard. It was carried on until it rained, and they would come back night after night after night. And the interest of the children in the vampire slowly started to fade. I guess as it got colder, it got boring, and nothing was ever found. But it sort of stemmed a folklore of that Gorbals vampire did lurk in the necropolis graveyard. You know, was it just children's imagination, or was it something more? Here we have the mausoleum of Archibald Douglas Monteith, who served in East India Company before returning to Glasgow. He was interred here in 1842 and his brother James was interred here in 1850. There is a story attached to this gentleman. It is debatable, but it's while he was serving in India, he made his fortune when an elephant carrying precious gems belonging to the Maharaja was captured, and he relieved him of the gems. So the mausoleum is based on the Knights Templar Church of the Holy Sceptre. The interesting thing about it is this has no writing, letterings or numerals inscribed anywhere on it. So unless you knew who was in it, you wouldn't know who was in it, if you get what I mean. As you can see down below there, this graveyard just goes on forever. It's massive. I didn't actually get to go down there, but yeah, it was beautiful. In Britain, people were buried in graveyards in the 1800s and all the years before this. This caused unsanitary and squalid conditions as the graveyards were overflowing. The decomposing bodies' fluids would get into the water, and in 1848 this caused a big cholera epidemic. So the government decided to deal with the burial crisis, and the Nuisances Removal and Disease Prevention Act was amended. So while all this was going on in London, Glasgow still had the same similar problem where burial grounds next to churches were being overrun with bodies. So they decided to get in onto the Cemetery Act in 1832. This allowed people to profit from burials, and private gardens and memorials were opened up to be burial grounds. So to summarise, this act meant that graveyards next to churches were not the only place you could bury your dead. You could bury them in private cemeteries, and that's how cemeteries came around. On the evening of 28th of March 1960, a fire started in a bonded warehouse owned by Archibald in Cheapsdale Street in Glasgow. The fire service were initially called by 999 at around 7:15, and he was called by the ice cream company, which was near Whiskey Bond. The first fire crews arrived at 7:21 and requested more pumps to attend. Crews were informed by civilians that smokes and flames had been seen on Warwick Street side of the building, and additional crews and equipment were sent to investigate. There was a massive explosion because the warehouse contained millions of gallons of whiskey held in 21,000 wooden casks and over 30,000 gallons of rum. The various explosions burst through the front and the rear of the walls of the building and outwards, the building collapsed. This collapse instantly killed 3 firemen on the Cheapside Street, as well as 11 firemen, 5 salvagemen who were battling the blaze from the rear of the building in Warwick Street. In just 40 minutes, the firemaster had upgraded the incident and requested more than 20 pumps. At its peak, 30 pumps, 5 turntable ladders and various special vehicles were in attendance. In all, it took 450 firefighters from the Greater Glasgow area over a week to extinguish. This next fire was in Kilburney Street on Friday the August in 1972. This again was a warehouse fire on the south side of Glasgow, and it killed 7 Glaswegian fire servicemen in a flashover while they were trying to rescue a trapped colleague. What started out as a routine industrial premises fire resulted in one of the highest losses of life for the UK fire service at a single incident in peacetime. Oh, he died with his children.
Not with his children.
Oh, with 4 children who he was trying to rescue. Oh. Even though there's 50,000 burials here, you'll see that there's not many tombstones. So this is the reason that only elite few are marked with their gravestone, tombs or mausoleum. And because this is was originally a merchant's lands, a lot of these tombstones are of Glasgow's merchants, middle classes and gentlefolk. Glasgow was one of the richest cities in the world, and this was all thanks to the shipbuilding industry on the Clyde. Prosperous merchants classes of the city were eager to mark their place in society by commissioning elaborate and very expensive funerary monuments for the newly established burial ground. The Victorians had a fascination with death. I must be Victorian then. So grand cemeteries popped up in Glasgow, London, and these were meant to be a joyful space. Victorians loved to have beautiful sculptures and landscape, and buried their people with inscriptions of what they've achieved in life. And it was supposed to be a place of reflection and joy. This is the monument of Charles Clark Mccurdy. Well, I can't do that without doing a Scottish accent, I'm sorry, and I'm rubbish at Scottish accents anyway. This man was a wealthy Glaswegian businessman, and he made his fortune in a large cotton spinning company and estates in the West Indies. So we went up one side of the graveyard, and this is the view from going down the other side looking up of the graveyard, if that makes sense. In 1830, before the big necropolis was actually here, this was the first burial of a Jewish man called Joseph Levy, who was a jeweller, and he died of cholera, and he was buried in this Jewish part in 1832. This plot of land was owned by the Jewish people, and the necropolis was kind of added on to this. There are 57 Jewish burials here. There's been no Jewish burials here since 1855. They were then transferred to the Eastern Necropolis. This cemetery is now subsumed within the later necropolis, and due to its low-level location, it is often unrecognised in its significance. In fact, when I came upon it, I didn't even know what it was until I read the inscription here. This is a memorial to a man we have visited in a previous video. We visited his where he was executed. So this is a memorial to William Wallace, or Sir William Wallace. He was a Scottish knight who became one of the main leaders during the First War of Scottish Independence. Along with Andrew Moray, Willis defeated an English army at the Battle of Stirling Bridge in 1297, and he was appointed the Guardian of Scotland, and served Scotland until his defeat at the Battle of Falkirk in July 2098. He was captured and handed over to King Edward I, who had him hanged, drawn and quartered for high treason. This type of execution is awful. He was hanged, but he was released while he was still alive. His bowels were removed from him while he was alive and burned before him, and then he was beheaded and cut into 4 parts. His preserved head was placed on a pike on top of the London Bridge, where he was later joined by the heads of his brothers. Just behind me here is a bridge called the Bridge of Sighs. This was meant to be the main entrance to the cemetery, and it still is. You can still walk across it. This was originally designed to be the front gate and was meant to be a tunnel into the entry of the graveyard. There's an inscription from the Merchants' House of Glasgow, the group of local merchants who established the necropolis in 1832. So if you've made it to the end of this video, then thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it, and I shall see you again sometime, wherever that may be.
When nothing really matters, that's all I wanna do. I hope that you are safe and that I will see you soon. If I can lay down beside you, I would, I would, I would.